So people are still coming in, but let's start. So very short introduction about myself. My name is Annabeth Vermameren. I am Dutch. I'm married to an American. So on the picture you see our sons. This was about 5 years ago in Philadelphia. Maybe you recognize it if you're from there as well. And about 11 years ago, I started my own business, New2NL. So I help international families find a school for their children, and I advise about everything related to education. I also write a lot of articles and record videos. So on my YouTube channel and my website, New2NL, you can also find a lot of information. Our children are now 14 and 12. So my youngest just started at secondary school. So it's the beginning of a new era for us. So by now I have a lot of information and a lot of experience with secondary schools. So this is the agenda for tonight. The timeline of group 8 is very important. I saw that some of your children are still in group 7 or 6. That's fine as well, of course. Maybe things will change next year, so keep track next year how things will be done now. But I will give you the timeline for this school year. Then you will see in secondary education, you will find a lot of abbreviations. VMBO, HAVO, VWO, there's a lot more, but I'll guide you through that, so don't worry. And then it's also important, of course, to understand after which type of education you can follow, which kind of further studies and what profession you could get after this type of education. Then I'll discuss the differences and the similarities between schools, because like primary schools, no two schools are the same. What to look for in a school, and a little bit about the Amsterdam lottery. I saw that some of you are from other cities, so I'll tell a little bit about other places as well. For an in-depth webinar about the Amsterdam lottery, then in February you can attend again, because that is really dedicated to Amsterdam, because that lottery is one of a kind. So I won't go too deep into the Amsterdam lottery this time. And then we'll have the FAQ, and you can ask your questions then. So this is the timeline for group 8. It starts for the Amsterdam parents on November 15 and 16 with the Scholen Arena. That is a school fair where almost all schools present themselves, so that you can see everyone at the same time. It's in the Kromhouthal in Noord, and the GBB company has arranged for free transport there. In other towns, they also have a similar fair or just the open days of the school. So in Amsterdam, the open days are mostly in January and February. Some are already in November and December. I know in The Hague and Rotterdam, they have already started. So check the website of the school in your area. Some schools, they also have a lesjesmiddag, and maybe that's a confusing term to you, so I'll explain what the difference is. So the open day is for children mostly of group 8, but it could be a good idea to also already go with your group 7 child. And that's for children and parents. And they usually have introduction speech by the principal, and then you can walk around in the building. A lot of teachers are there, so you can ask your questions. I will also send you a questionnaire with questions that you could ask during the open day. So then you can compare the schools, get a lot of information about them. Be prepared, because it's a lot. And sometimes you'll find yourself at 2 or 3 open days on a Saturday, and also some evening sessions. And for a lot of schools, you have to sign up in advance. So make sure that you are in time, because they have time slots, and when they're full, then you officially cannot visit anymore. Last year, there was maybe one school in Amsterdam that checked actually if you had made a reservation. So maybe you just go even if you have not reserved, but it can be that they will refuse because they're really full. And then the lesjesmiddag, that's only for the children. And then it's a sort of trial class. So they will teach a few classes, so for maybe 1.5 hours in total, and they will have 3 or 4 subjects, just to give the children a taste of what it is like to be in that particular school. So I would recommend to only sign up for the lesjesmiddag, so the trial classes, for maybe the 3 or 4 schools that your child likes best. Not every school organizes those lesjesmiddag sessions, so you have to sign up and then they really check. So be prepared for that as well. But don't go to too many trial classes because it's too overwhelming for them. So while you're busy with all that, between the 10th and the 31st of January, your child will get preliminary advice. That used to be in the end of group 7, but they have postponed it to mid group 8. So in group 7, your child has probably received sort of indication of the advice, so that you have sort of idea what to expect, but this is not the official preliminary advice yet. So that's important to know. The group 8 teacher will give this advice based on the test results of CITO or EAP or some other tests with which they follow your child's progress, but only from group 6, but not earlier than that. So it's group 6, 7, and 8, they will look at the tests. But it's not only test-based. They will also look at your child's attitude, motivation, interest, intelligence, study skills, the whole child, the whole package, and not only the test results. Together with your child, you as parents will be invited for a meeting with the teacher, and there has to be a second person present as well. So usually the principal or the IBer or some other teacher who is in management as well. And they will give you the advice in writing. But that's only the pre-advice, because between the 27th of January and the 16th of February, your child will take the transition test, which is called the doorstroomtoets in Dutch. This is not an exam. I've met some international parents who thought that this test decides the rest of their child's future. That's not the case. What they do, they test the current level for Dutch. So that's mainly spelling, grammar, especially spelling of the verbs, because that is difficult in Dutch, and comprehensive reading. So understanding the questions and understanding what you have read. This has also changed compared to previous years, but so now it's mostly Dutch and math. If the test results are higher than the teacher's advice, then the final advice will be upgraded. So if the teacher gives advice of, for example, HAVO, and the outcome of the transition test is HAVO/VWO, so there's a lot of combinations, then the test results will be decisive. So then the final advice will become HAVO/VWO. However, when the test results are lower than the teacher's advice, then the teacher's advice will stay. So the final advice cannot be lower than the advice of the teacher. So that's important to know. So you should see the transition test as a sort of second opinion or confirmation of the teacher's opinion. The teacher's advice is, of course, pretty subjective. So then the test is more objective. But the test results are only representative of that specific day. So if a child just had a bad day or didn't sleep well or just doesn't take tests very well, then maybe their result would be lower. But then the teacher who sees the child every day for a longer period, they can still give advice based on what they've seen overall and not only based on the test results. So that's why you need both components. The final advice has to be given before the 24th of March. And since last year, this is the same for the whole country. Previously, every city had their own procedure, but now it's the same, and also the application procedure has the same timing. So between the 25th and the 31st of March, you have to apply for a secondary school. In some cities, you may already apply earlier, but you need to have the final advice. So that comes first. It doesn't give you any priority or any preference if you apply earlier. So don't stress. Before it turns the 1st of April, you will have to apply. So that's very important. Through the primary school, you will get the login details, and you apply online. And in Amsterdam, that's called ELK, so ELK. But in other towns, it's different. So make sure that you know from your primary school when the login details come and how to log in on the portal. And on this portal, you will get to see the schools that you can apply for. So based on the level of advice of your child. In Amsterdam, the outcome of the lottery is the 10th of April. In smaller towns, usually it comes earlier. Depends a bit on the procedure. In Amsterdam, they have the schoolkeuze 020 website, and there you can find the open days, but also the schools, a short description about them, and a lot more information. Every city has their own website, so that is your guideline. In Amsterdam, they also have a paper guide. They didn't update it yet, but usually they present it before the schoolarenas, expected pretty soon. So check in your town if there is a website and a paper guide, and use that when you are visiting schools. About the teacher advice, I already explained a bit what that is based on. So it's a lot of different factors. So they really look at the whole child, and it should not come as a surprise so much because you will have had meetings with the teacher before already, but sometimes it's hard to understand what they take into consideration and what is important to them. So definitely ask the teacher if you are not sure about that. It is very common to get a double advice. So that means VMBO T/HAVO or HAVO/VWO. And that means that it's still open. Some secondary schools, they let you apply for the lower level of the double advice. Others, they only accept children at a higher level when you only have a single higher level. So it depends on the school. But when you apply for the schools, on the list will only be included the schools what you can apply for. And sometimes they will ask you, do you want a higher or the lower level of the double advice? It's also good to know there's no specific gymnasium advice. Gymnasium is the same as VWO, so the same level, but there's two streams of VWO. So you have Atheneum and Gymnasium. The difference is that Gymnasium has additional Latin and ancient Greek and classical studies, but the diploma is the same. So there's also no advice for Gymnasium, but the teacher could say, so yeah, your child would do well. You could also try with Gymnasium, or maybe VWO is already high enough, can be very challenging. So maybe Gymnasium is a bit too much. Or some children, they're not interested in classical studies or additional ancient languages, and they don't care for Gymnasium. So there's a lot of different ways. There's no university study that requires Gymnasium. So that's important to know as well. When you want to study, for example, medicine, it could be handy to know some Latin, but it's not a requirement. And if you want to become a teacher of Latin and Greek, then it can be handy to already study Gymnasium. But yeah, those are the exceptions, really. The transition test is an aptitude test. So it tests what the children have learned in the period of group 6 to group 8. It's not an exam that you can pass or fail. And officially, children don't need to practice or study for the transition test, but sometimes, especially with comprehensive reading, when Dutch is not their native language, it could be good to practice with that, not specifically for the test, but more to get the understanding of how those words, what they mean, how to read the text, what kind of questions they might ask. I will send you an email after this webinar, and I will also put a recommendation for webinars about comprehensive reading that are free. So I did them with my younger son as well. He had some issues with comprehensive reading, although he speaks both Dutch and English at home, so it's a strong language for him, but it was a bit difficult. And then it turned out that he didn't really understand how to read the questions, and he was just reading the whole text and not the lines where the question was about. So they say, what does this word mean in line 4 to 8? And then you shouldn't answer the question like, in general, it means this, or in the rest of the text, it says that, but only specifically for that part. Once we had practiced that, he only had 1 or 2 mistakes in the transition test for comprehensive reading. So it really worked. Apart from that, don't really get nervous about it or think that everything depends on this test. That's not the case. Children who have lived less than 4 years in the Netherlands, they are not obliged to take the test. So in this case, the Group 8 teacher gives an advice. Sometimes it helps if children do take the transition test to show their level or where they are at that moment. The transition test is very language-based. So if they're still learning Dutch, then it doesn't really represent their level of knowledge in general, but it tests their language abilities a lot. So that is why they say it's not obligatory if you live here less than 4 years, but sometimes it can be used to prove the teacher wrong, maybe, or to show what they're capable of. So discuss about that with the teacher. A lot of secondary schools, they have a mixed level bridge class, which in Dutch they go on a lot of different ways. For example, a gemengde brugklas or dakpanklas. So when you see brugklas, don't immediately think that it's always mixed level, because that is not the case. So when it is a mixed bridge class, that means that they have, for example, VMBO, T and HAVO together in the first year, or sometimes even in the second or even the third year, or they have HAVO and VWO together, or some schools have VMBO, HAVO and VWO together. So then the children still have more time to develop and show what they are capable of and what they're interested in and the subjects they're good at and what they still have to improve on. So especially for children who started to learn Dutch later, when they haven't reached their full potential yet, it can help to go to this mixed level bridge class, and then they have more time to stream to a higher level if that's what they're interested in and capable of. But you really have to check the school if they offer a mixed level bridge class, and not all schools offer that. And then it's also good to know that with a diploma of one level, you may move up to the next level. So it's not that a child is stuck at the level of the advice of the teacher in Group 8. It does take more time, however. So with a VMBOT diploma, which takes 4 years, you can move to the 4th year of HAVO. And HAVO is 5 years. I'll show you a graph later on. And after the 5th year of HAVO with the diploma, you can move to the 5th year of VWO. There's a lot more crossovers possible. I'll show you in a minute. So it really depends on the child, how they develop, what their interests are. There's a lot of roads that lead to Rome. So this is not the end. So the advice of Group 8 tells you through which door your child will enter secondary school. It doesn't say anything about through which door they will leave the school in the end. If they don't work at all, so even if they're very capable and very intelligent, but if they don't put in the work, they can also go to a lower level again. So it's not guaranteed that with the high advice, they will stay at this level. All those abbreviations in perspective. So VMBO is a vocational school. And the children learn for a profession. And on the next slide, I'll show you which professions. And that takes 4 years. And after the 4th year of VMBO, they can go to MBO. There's different types of VMBO, so even more abbreviations, because there's different levels, and also of MBO, there's different levels to make it even more complicated. But like I said, you can also go with a VMBO-T diploma to HAVO. HAVO is more generic education that takes 5 years, and that leads to HBO, another abbreviation, I'm sorry. HBO stands for University of Applied Sciences. And that's the next confusion, because in a lot of countries you just say university, but we in the Netherlands have 2 different types of universities, a research university and University of Applied Sciences. For a research university, you need to have a VWO diploma, but it's also possible to do your bachelor's at HBO and then your master's at research university. Some HBO schools, they also have their own master's education. Also, often after the first year of HBO, you can go to research university. So there's a lot of possibilities here. People who are 21 or older, they can also take an entry exam with the university. So that's called a colloquium doctum. And then it doesn't matter what kind of education they have followed previously. So if they do well in their entry exam, then they're also admitted at university. So then even if you didn't have the chance to go to VWO or finish your high school, then that is an option as well. So if you want to, you can get there. So that is important to know that. Most universities, they accept everyone who applies. So provided you have a diploma and the right profile, I'll talk about profiles later. Only for the very few oversubscribed studies like medicine, they have portfolio or an assessment or some exams. But for most other studies, if you have the right diploma and the right profile, you will be accepted. So your grades are not that important. And there's no entry exam in most cases. So having a diploma is the most important thing. And then it's better to have a diploma of a lower level than go to a higher level, struggle, drop out, and have nothing. So yeah, that's a bit the idea of the Dutch system. There's a suitable diploma for everyone. And you can move on if you want to, if you develop at a later stage. And if you compare the Netherlands with the OECD countries, so those are more than 50 countries all over the world, the Dutch population is very high educated. And especially 61% of the women in the Netherlands have diploma for tertiary, so HBO or research university education. And that is compared to the OECD average of 41% for men and 54% for women. So in general, they're doing really well, but it's not perfect or flawless, of course, but this is how it works in general. I won't show you this now, but I've made a video in which I explain all the acronyms and how it works. I will send you the link so you can watch it yourself at home. The VMBO. So this takes 4 years. There's different levels of VMBO. So that is where it starts. And this is also what the advice is given by the teacher. So you have the basic vocational training. So that is VMBO B or basis. Then framework training, that is K or kader. Then mixed training, G, so gemengd. However, that one is sort of fading out. So most likely your child will not get the gemengd VMBO advice anymore. And then VMBO-T, and that is theoretical section of VMBO. The differences are that the B and the K are more practical, so they have a lot of on-the-job training, and T is more theoretical. After that, you could also go to HAVO, which is even more theoretical. They have more subjects at HAVO, so if your child is planning on going to HAVO after the 4th year of VMBO-T, it is important that you plan ahead and that they study an extra subject, or they can maybe catch up during the summer vacation. So the HAVO has to accept a child, but it can be that they are behind with one of the subjects. So be prepared for that. After the formation stage, they can choose between technical, agriculture, economics, and care and welfare. And then they get more practical and theoretical experience in those sectors. Another thing to understand is that VMBO-T is also referred to as MAVO. Officially, MAVO is an old term that's not really used anymore. But a lot of schools still talk about MAVO. It's also a bit shorter than VMBO-T, MAVO, HAVO, VWO. But it is the same thing in the end. Then HAVO, that takes 5 years. HAVO is more generic education. And after the 3rd year, the students have to choose between 4 profiles. And this is the same profiles for VWO. Yeah, there are some differences in levels. The 4 profiles are culture and society, economics and society, science and health, and science and technology. And all those profiles, they have a compulsory part and some optional classes. So if you want to study medicine, for example, it's obligatory to have the science and health profile that contains some type of math and physics and chemistry and biology and some other subjects as well. And then you can choose some extra. And English and Dutch are compulsory for everyone, and some type of math is for most profiles also compulsory, apart from a few at HAVO. But there's 4 different types of math, so you still have some choice there. So some are more statistics and others are more formula based. In the end, in HAVO, the students have to choose 7 exam subjects. So they have some freedom, but with the profile, some subjects are fixed. And they can go to University of Applied Sciences or to the 5th year of VWO afterwards. And sometimes they also go to MBO after HAVO because they want to do some more vocational education or some very specific study that is not offered at HBO level. So there's a lot of options after that. VWO or VWO in Dutch, that takes 6 years. Like I mentioned earlier, there's 2, let's say, branches of VWO's Atheneum and Gymnasium. Both give equal access to university, and that's really important to know that and to remember that. After the 3rd year, they choose the same types of profiles as in HAVO, and they have to take 8 subjects for their final exams, but they also have 1 year longer to study. A lot of parents ask me what the differences are between HAVO and VWO. So the basics are the same. VWO is 1 year longer, and HAVO is more answering the questions, and then VWO is more like, why is it like this? Or combine different sources and then think of why one led to the next. So it's more why questions, more thinking about the background of things that happened, or more analytical. A lot of schools that have combined levels in the 1st year or first 2 or 3 years, it depends a bit on how they deal with that as a school, but it's very common that they give a test to the combined bridge class, and then they say, okay, these are HAVO questions and the final questions are VWO level. Or they give 2 grades, so 1 for HAVO, and then you need to answer more questions right for a pass at VWO level. Or they say we teach at VWO level, but we test at HAVO level. So it really depends on the school how they deal with that. So during the open day, ask questions about that as well. And usually at the end of the combined bridge class, the teachers will give an advice to either HAVO or the VWO would be the most suitable type of a school. But then they've had more time to develop and show what they are capable of and interested in. So those are the main difference between HAVO and VWO. But remember, from HAVO, you can still go to VWO if you want. These are some examples of professions you could get after each type of education. Of course, there's many more options, but just to give you an idea. So after VMBO, you can go to MBO, and then a lot of people with the MBO diploma, they become an assistant or secretary or security officer, but also some technical jobs, woodworker, hairdresser, nurse, childminder. So a lot of very practical jobs, but they have the right qualifications and they know what they're doing basically. Then HBO, so University of Applied Sciences, and you will see a lot of those professions you need to go in your country to university. So it is confusing, but there's really a lot of jobs that you can do with HBO as well. For example, teacher, accountant, manager, team leader, consultant, artist, pilot, some types of engineer. So there's two different types of engineer in the Netherlands. So you have ING, and that is HBO level, or IR, that is research university level. So it also depends on what type of engineering you would like to do. And then research university, they also abbreviate that with WO, which is wetenschappelijk onderwijs, so scientific education. And that is more the specialist jobs, the analytical functions. So like lawyer, psychologist, doctor, surgeon, specialist, professor, notary, researcher, scientist. So those are examples of university jobs. It is also common that companies offer education, so not the secondary school education, but more on the job training. So then in the end, you can also move up to a higher level, but then really specific to your job. Or so you can become a nurse with an MBO diploma, but also with the HBO diploma, but that often means that they have more managerial role. So they're still a nurse, but then have more responsibility compared to someone who comes from MBO. So there's a lot of options here. So first, the level is decided, then they can move up to the level, then they have to choose a sector in VMBO or a profile in the third year of HAVO or VWO, and then still there's a lot of options. So some parents feel that their child has to know by age 12 what they want to become, but that's not really the case. There's still a lot of options left. Maybe you've heard of technasium. There's some confusion about that. It's again another type of education, another name. This is not a level, so it's not a type of stream like HAVO or VWO is. There's only a few in the country, so you can find all the schools on this website, technasium.nl, and they offer a technasium program. So it is an additional program usually offered on HAVO or VWO level, sometimes VMBOT level, an extra subject that they offer. So that's called research and design, or O&O in Dutch. And some people think that technical education, the name sounds a bit like that, but also that is not true, because what they do is they create solutions to everyday problems. And they work a lot with projects in a team. So the group dynamics are very important. And the assignments usually come from real companies or institutions. So they're solving a real problem. It comes on top of the regular curriculum. So they have a HAVO diploma, and then usually technasium is only the first 3 years, so before they choose a profile, and that comes on top of that. So it's extra workload. So the same as gymnasium is extra workload with Greek and Latin, technasium is extra workload with research and design. Often those projects are focused on future problems, sustainability. So it depends a bit who gives the assignment. To give you an example, there's a technasium school in Amsterdam, and they developed a trash can that has a sensor in it, and when it is full, then it gives a signal to whoever who controls them, so they know, oh, it's time to empty the trash can. So it does not overflow, and it's not emptied too often, which costs extra time and labor. So only it's emptied when it's needed. They use different techniques, but it's not that they are really technical studies. So I hope you understand the difference in here. The students don't get a technician diploma when they finish, but they get a certificate that shows that on top of their HAVO, VWO, or sometimes the MBOT diploma, they have done the technician program. And it's suitable for students who are interested in these subjects, but also in working with projects and in teams. So it's not for everyone, and that's fine, of course. I'll very briefly talk about brugklas and ISK. It's important to know that brugklas is for children who started learning Dutch at a later stage, who are not entirely fluent yet in group 8, but who are very motivated and who are good at math as well. And then brugklas is an intensive year of Dutch, and in a small class of about 15 children. And the aim is to, at the end of brugklas, get a high advice compared to what the teacher of group 8 recommended. There are a few schools that have a brugklas department in Amsterdam, so I've listed them here. In other cities, they have brugklas as well. It's not everywhere. The Hague has a lot of brugklas options, but there's also strong demand, so they're more selective there. But it's not for everyone. So they really have to be very motivated, and there cannot be any other issues like dyslexia or behavioral issues that require more attention, because the teacher is really there to focus on improving the Dutch. And they prepare for secondary school. So after the brugklas, they start in the first year of secondary school. So in that respect, they may have lost a year. But since most cases they end up at a higher level, or they have a stronger base at the level that was initially advised to them, they gain time and it will be a bit less difficult probably than initially would have been the case. So they gain in that respect. So it just depends on how you look at it. And then there's also ISK, and that is a newcomer class for secondary students. And so that is for students who don't speak any Dutch or only a little bit of Dutch yet. So for brugklas, you really need to have good base of the Dutch language. So ISK is a different track, and then after that, they can go to secondary school. Usually those students are older than 12, so then it's like, what is the right level? What's the right class, the right grade? So that's different for every student. So those are the options when Dutch is not at a fluent level yet. Well, your children are now still in primary school. There's a lot of difference with secondary school. So be prepared, because while they are now among the oldest of the entire school, in secondary, they will be the youngest. And that can be very overwhelming, because there can also be 18-year-olds in the same building. So difference is huge. So be prepared. They will maybe find it a bit difficult in the beginning. So that's also something that you can ask the schools at the open days. So some schools have a different building for the first year students, or a different entrance and for the first and second year. And then you don't really run into the almost adult kids yet. But that depends on the size of the school and the layout of the building, of course. You also notice your child will grow up fast. They will hit puberty with all kinds of other challenges, some a bit more than others. They will become much more independent. So in primary school, you maybe are still involved a lot as a parent, but in secondary, that's much less. Your child has to take decisions. They have to understand what's going on, what they have to do for homework. Maybe you've heard of the Magister app. It's a lot in the news now. That is an app that the students and also the parents can download on their phones, and then they can follow everything. So the homework of the child, their schedule. Also be prepared that a lot of hours will be cancelled and lessons will change. And so they really have to keep track of what's going on. And then you can also see the grades there and a lot more information. Call in sick, everything goes through these apps. But some schools have found that the students are very stressed because their parents are on top of it all the time. So they're now having a test at some schools that the parents are excluded from this app and just leave the students be. I'm curious to see how that will develop. So my older son, first 2 years, he went to a school and they used Som Today. That's another portal, so same as Magister, but different provider. And every grade that he got, we as parents also got a notification. And sometimes we knew it even before he did. That wasn't always very nice. As a child, you also want to choose the time when to tell your parents, and maybe some things don't tell to your parents. But with these apps, you are on top of it all the time. He changed schools, and now I can see all his grades, but I'm not checking it regularly. So I let him tell me what he got for a test, and that also takes the pressure off. So a lot is expected from your child, and in the beginning, they might need help. So they need to check the schedule. They need to know what subjects they have on the day, what books they need, what homework they need to do. So there's a lot of things that they have to manage. And what's different for most students as well is that they live much further away from the secondary school compared to the primary school. So they often have to cycle to school. Some students, they go to school even in another town. And so that's a big change as well. Some students take public transport, but that's not very common, but depending on where you live, of course. And in general, the secondary schools are much bigger than the primary schools. So most primary schools are between 200 and 400 students, I would say. Secondary schools, they about 700 students. They are considered on the smaller side. There are some schools that have more than 1,000 students, especially if they have different levels and then different programs. Then yeah, they have a lot of kids as well. If your child prefers a more small scale school, then there are some options there. So what I mentioned before, the communication with the school will change. And also this depends on the school. So it's common that each class has 1 or 2 mentors. So those are subject teachers who are mentor on top of that. So the students see them a couple of times per week. They have mentor class in which they talk about, in the beginning, it's about group formation and group dynamics. If something happened, they talk about it in the mentor class. If they have to choose their profile in the 3rd year, then they talk a lot about that. So it really depends on which year and what's going on, what they talk about. And the mentor is also the first point of contact with the school. So if something happened, you call the mentor. And sometimes they prefer that you call them or send them an email or WhatsApp. So ask the mentor, how do we communicate? And it's common that the parents are invited in the first year, first weeks, to have a meeting with all the parents. So you also get to know the other parents a little bit. And you get to know your mentor, and they explain how their school works and what your child has to do, what's expected from them. But you will see the contact with the other parents is minimal as well. So that is a big change with primary school too. And you have to take more the initiative. So what I did with my son's classes, I just talked to some parents and exchanged phone numbers so that if you need some parent perspective, you can contact them still. There's not a list with all the phone numbers of all the parents of the whole class anymore, like you may have at primary school. So you have to take your own initiative here. all the trips that the class makes. So in the higher years, they usually also go abroad at least once. All the trips are without parents, so with multiple teachers, but no parents. So that's a difference as well. In secondary school, they have a lot of different subjects. So, like I said, Dutch and English are compulsory. For most levels, the students also have to learn German and French. And then it becomes an option. So, between the additional languages after the third year, usually. Some schools they teach Spanish or Italian, or very few also Turkish or Arabic maybe, and they can be instead of either French or German, but you still have to keep one of those. They have biology, chemistry, physics, economy, history, geography, and then in gymnasium Latin and ancient Greek. Sometimes they have other studies. So it really depends on the school, but there's a basic program and then some extras, and also depending on the year. So in the third year, they usually have most subjects, and when they have chosen their profile, they can drop some subjects again. Some schools, they combine different subjects. So my younger son, he has a subject that's called individuals and society, and that's a sort of combination between geography, history, world orientation. It's also common to combine physics and chemistry in the first years, and then it's often called NASC. So it's more like sciences, and then it makes a split after the third year. So which type of science? In any case, your child needs to bring the right books to school. So my advice is already pack your bag in the evening, so you make sure that you have everything. Often they also need an iPad or a Chromebook or a laptop, so they have to carry that too. So the bag is really heavy. A lot of schools, they have lockers, and then they can put the books for the afternoon classes in the locker and then walk around with a much less heavy bag. And then they swap during the break, and then they put the books of the afternoon classes in a bag and leave the morning books in the locker. They have to figure out how those things work. The teachers are specialized teachers who give just one or sometimes two subjects. So that's also different from primary school, where you usually have one or two teachers for the whole year. And then it depends a bit on the policy of the school and the layout of the school. It is common that teachers stay in their classroom that they have decorated with everything related to their subject. And then the children have to change classroom every hour, every few hours. So they walk through the whole school. Some schools, they reverse that the students stay in the same classroom and then the teachers come in. Of course, that doesn't work for music and physical education, but for the other classes, it does. But then the teachers have to carry a lot of things with them, which is sometimes also not ideal. So this is also something to ask at the open day, how they deal with that. Or they have all the first years, they go to the same wing of the building. So they sort of contained area, and then they only have to walk smaller distances. Another big change is homework. So in primary school, they sometimes get a bit of homework just to get used to the idea to make use of an agenda. But the step up to secondary school homework is rather big. Depends a bit on the school. Some schools, they say about 1.5 hours every day to spend on homework is average. Some schools, they already let the students do their homework while in school. So then the teacher gives some instructions, and the rest of the lesson time, the students can work by themselves. And if they really focus, then maybe they finish everything before their lesson ends. It, of course, also depends on how motivated the student is and how serious they take it and how difficult school is for them. So they really have to check the portal, so the Magister or School Today app. So the teachers will put the homework in there, and often they also have an agenda or another way to write down. So some teachers say when you write down yourself, then you remember it better. So it really depends on how the school deals with that. Make sure that your child knows where to find the homework, that they understand the difference between learning and making exercise. And they have different types of tests as well. They have a bigger test, which is called a proefwerk, and a smaller test, which is called SO, which means schriftelijke overhoring, or MO, which is mondelinge overhoring, that's a verbal test. The grading is very different as well. So that's also a bit different per school, but in general, the bigger test they maybe count for 3 times and a smaller test for 1 time. And then at the end of the year, they calculate the average per subject. And if you have a 5.5 or higher, you have a pass. And then you move on to the next year. It's usually also allowed to have maybe 2 5s or 1 4, but not for the core subjects, which are English and Dutch and math. So and that's what you can find in the school guide, and ask the mentor what your child needs to pass to the next year and what grade they need to get as a minimum for a test to have a 5.5. So there's a tool where students can calculate that, especially at the end of the year. Then it gets exciting for some. But 5.5 in general is enough to pass. So what's also different compared to primary school is the timetable. So every day in secondary school can be different. So they all start at a different time. So yeah, 8:30 is pretty common. Some start earlier, others later. They finish maybe around 2 or 3 or 4. It really depends. Can be that every day they finish at a different time. And then after a few weeks, the whole schedule changes again. So they really have to keep track of that every day. It can also be that the teacher is sick or something else is going on, or if they're accompanying another class on a trip, then the teacher cannot teach the other classes. And then the class is usually cancelled. So it's common that the school only has a few substitute teachers, but they cannot teach all the classes at the same time. And what happens then is that they have an in-between hour, or tussenuur in Dutch. It depends a bit on the school, but it is common that the children, they can just do whatever they want to, and they have to be back in time for the next class. Sometimes they go home, or they go to a friend's home, or they go to the shopping center, I don't know. Talk about this with your child, what's okay with you and what's not, what they can buy and not. But this is also part of the independency that you as a parent have less control over. Some schools, they have bigger teacher shortage than other schools. So that's something you could ask as well during the open day. In general, unfortunately, in the bigger cities like Amsterdam, the teacher shortage is problematic. It's not really the school's fault. It's just, yeah, there's not enough teachers or qualified teachers, I would say. So be prepared for these in between hours. That will happen a lot. It is common that if, for example, a third hour is cancelled, that they try to change that a bit, that they move the classes around, that the first hour is free and they just start later. And then it's all the next hours in a row. That really depends. Also, an hour is maybe not an hour, and that sounds maybe strange, but the school hour can be different than clock hour. So a lot of schools, they have a lesson hour that takes 50 minutes or 45 minutes. Sometimes they have what they call double hour, and then it's twice 50 minutes, for example. Some other schools, they teach and they have one project for a day part, so usually 3 hours. So there's a lot of variations there as well. Maximum for most schools is 8 lesson hours in a day, with a short break of 20 minutes and a longer break of 30 minutes. And they don't have until the 8th hour every day. Most schools have a canteen, but you have to buy the food, so it's not provided. And a lot of students bring food from home, like they did in primary school, or they go to nearby Albert Heijn or somewhere to buy their lunch there. So do discuss with them how much they can spend, because if you don't, then you're in for some surprises. So it is common that they can leave the school during school hours, so when a class is cancelled. But some schools, they say the first year students have to stay within the school premises. Other schools don't care, so make sure that your child knows the rules. Be prepared that they can be all over the city, or they go with friends to their homes, or they take some friends to your home. So make sure that your child knows what is accepted and what is not. So a lot of changes compared to the current years. There's a lot of differences between the secondary schools, but there's also some things that they have in common. Like I said, there are some obligatory subjects. The government has established the minimum amount of hours that the schools have to teach per year, but how the schools want to teach those hours and which extra subjects they want to offer. So they all give grades or evaluations. They have report cards through which you can follow your child's progress. But the way they deal with that is can be different per school. So it's common to give grades, but some schools, they say it's sufficient or it's almost good. You have to improve in this aspect and then you will get a pass. So it depends on how they evaluate the work. Like primary school, the secondary schools will ask for voluntarily parental contribution. This is usually a bit higher compared to the primary school. So usually between 150 and 300 euros per year. And then it's common to have a trip abroad in the third year or fourth year. And then you have to pay extra. So maybe you want to start saving for that. I already mentioned the mentor class, the knockers. It's also common to have school parties. Depends a bit on the size of the school. If it's a small school, then they often have a party with the entire school. When it's a bigger school, then it gets a bit crowded. So then they have maybe first year and second year party. Usually the parties are in the school if they have a big enough room for that. So it's common that they have a canteen or aula where they can host those parties, or sometimes they hire external location, but that's not very common, especially not for the younger kids. The schools, they also have a student council, so they talk with the management about things that they want to change. A lot of primary schools have the leerlingenraad, so it's the same idea. And then they also have a parent council and a participation council with parents and teachers. So a bit similar as primary school, but then on a bigger scale with bigger kids. So these are the subjects that are compulsory, and then the schools can, like I said, combine different subjects if they want, or offer some additional subjects. So you also have some schools, they have a special focus on arts or sports or sciences, but it's always on top of the basic program. So I know some other countries, you have some schools that are specialized in languages or specialized in technical studies or in sciences. Here, that's not the case. They all have one of the levels, so VMBO, HAVO, VWO, and then they can offer some additional things on top of the regular program. The government has established core objectives or attainment targets, kerndoelen in Dutch. For secondary school, there's 58 of them, and those are descriptions of what the schools have to teach. so the guidelines, and then they have a lot of freedom to fill in the details themselves. But in the end, the diploma is the same. So VWO diploma is a VWO diploma, HAVO is HAVO, VWO T is VWO T, and so on. It's not that the diploma for one school is worth more than for another school. The universities or MBO schools, they don't care about the name of the school your child has graduated from. They look at the diploma, and sometimes if they have the right profile. So it's not that you can go to the wrong secondary school that your child cannot be accepted for that reason at a university. That's not how it works in the Netherlands. So that's also different from a lot of other countries. There's also a lot of differences between secondary schools, and these things you can ask at the open days and read on the website and in the school guide. So like I said, the school hour can be different. Some schools, they have a stronger focus on books, and others do a lot on iPad or laptop or a combination of the two. So that is very different. Some schools, they work mostly with projects or modules in which they combine different subjects, and a bit more traditional schools, they have just separate subjects for everything. It is more and more common that the students can choose some subjects. So depending on the type of school, they have different names for that. So they call it Daltonuur, and it's a Dalton school, or M-uur, what is for Montessori schools, or keuzewerktijd for schools that don't have a particular philosophy. But what that means is that they have a few hours per week that they can decide, I want to do an optional class because I think that's interesting. So maybe robotics or choir or some other subject. Or they can say, I have some difficulty with math. I'll attend the math class of another teacher because maybe they explain it in a different way that I understand it better, or just a repetition makes me understand the subject better. They have to do something, and they also have to sign up in advance. So it's not that they can just leave the school and do whatever they want to, but they have the freedom to choose the optional subjects. English is an obligatory language, and German and French as well, or sometimes other languages. But some schools, they offer additional classes, or they give the option for students to get an additional certificate. So a fast lane or Cambridge English, or sometimes IB English, but as a subject, or Goethe for German, or Del for French. It means more study. Often you also have to pay extra for those certificates, but then, yeah, you can prove your level. So maybe it comes in handy when you want to study abroad, or when you apply for a job later in a different language, that you can prove your level. They're recognized around the world for the intensity and the level of the language. The facilities of the schools can be very different. So they all need to have the basics, but some maybe have a very large sports hall, and others, they have a lot of art equipment. So if you find any of those things important, you should check that with the school. Some have an older building, others have a brand new building, or maybe different buildings at different locations, or there's a lot of options there. Like in primary school, it's not very common that a secondary school offers after school classes, but some do. It can be sports or orchestra or choir, or maybe some languages, Chinese, Arabic. So a lot of secondary school students, they go to the sports clubs like they did in primary school, but sometimes they have an after school program that they like to attend as well. Population of schools can be very different. Often it is a reflection of the neighborhood, but not always, because there's no priority for neighborhood anymore. So in theory, you can apply for any school in the city. There are some differences usually, so see how that works for the school of your interest. Also ask them if they have experience with children who don't speak Dutch at home, if that's your case, how they communicate with parents who don't speak Dutch, so you are prepared for that. Most schools have experience in that area, but maybe not at the smaller schools. Some schools are based on religion or educational philosophy, so the same as primary schools. Also for secondary schools, most religious schools are not really religious anymore, but this can vary per school. So also ask how that works. Sometimes they have a religion class. So that's when they talk about different religions or more about Protestant or Catholic, depending on the religion they belong to. Most cases, you don't really notice that in the rest of the school, but it depends. So always ask that. So the buildings can be different. Also, the atmosphere in the building can be different. Is it well organized? The students have a lot of freedom where they want to sit, what they do. So, yeah, what feel do you get there? And that's very personal. Also, look for the number of students per level. So it can be that in theory they offer VMBOT, HAVO, and VWO, but in practice there's maybe only one VWO class. Doesn't need to be bad, but it's good that you know that and think about it if it's good or not. Or that also means they don't have many teachers who teach at that level. Not many peers. Maybe it's a small class only. So just see how that works. Do they combine different classes? How do you feel about that of different levels in the class? So just see what works for you. All schools, they have to provide some special needs support, but some schools have more experience in behavioral issues or dyslexia or students who don't speak fluent Dutch yet. Or so if that's needed in your case, always ask how they can accommodate your child, how much experience they have in this area so that you don't need to reinvent the wheel. For children who have a more complex special needs, they are sometimes referred to special needs secondary schools, so VSO. It's not very common that they go from a regular primary school to a special needs secondary school, but the other way around is more common. So some schools are really big. So in Amsterdam, Calland Lyceum is the biggest school. They have 1,650 students. They also have VMBOT, HAVO, VWO, gymnasium, top sport class. It used to be art profile school, but not so much anymore, I believe. Technasium, they have so a lot of options. Far opposite is Gouda, that is the smallest school. That's Orthodox Jewish school. They only have 33 students in all levels combined. Most schools are somewhere in between that. The advantages of a bigger school are that they have usually more facilities, also more after-school programs. They have a lot of specialized teachers who are maybe specialized in dyslexia or behavioral issues, and they can help each other, whereas a smaller school often have to hire external people to help with special needs support. It also depends on the schools, always ask them directly. Often they have more subject choices, so they are obliged to offer the minimum, but the bigger schools, they usually can offer more additional things. And they are often part of networks that they can offer a lot of extra things, so they have more connections, maybe with companies that they can work together with, or a lot of other connections that could be beneficial for your child. Advantages of smaller schools are that they're usually more personal. It's easier to know everyone. It's easier to find your way. It's not overwhelming building. They often have smaller classes at smaller schools, but not always. So also ask that specifically. And it's the overall feel that you get, but also how they manage the school. So, for example, at Calland, it is a big school, but they have an entrance for only the first and the second years and a separate canteen for the first and second years. So they don't feel like they're part of a 1,650 student counting school. So it also depends on how they manage everything. what to look for in schools is basically what you find important. So these are a couple of things that you can ask about and look into. But if you don't find it important, then you can leave it out, of course. It's just a suggestion. On the website and the school guide, you can find a lot of more information about that. And also the schoolkeuzegids in Amsterdam or in other cities. It's called differently, but they have an overview of all the schools. Do your research and compare, because it is a lot. You have a lot of options. Very short about the Amsterdam lottery. Like I said, in February, I will give a webinar specifically about Amsterdam because it's so different compared to the other cities. What you have to know about Amsterdam is for HAVO and VWO advice, you need to rank 9 schools in order of your preference. This used to be 12, so it's a big improvement in that respect, but still a lot of schools. For VMBO-T, it's 6 schools, and for VMBO-B and K, it's 4 schools. The algorithm is based on placing as many students in the top 3. But yeah, it doesn't always play out like that. So definitely visit all the schools on your list so you know that there's a chance that your child will end up there. It is a lottery. It's completely random. You cannot influence it. Your child gets a lottery number randomly allocated, and number 1 they can place everywhere. But number 1,000, maybe the first school of preference is already full, and then you go down your list. In Amsterdam, every year there's about more than 7,500 students that take part in the lottery. So it's a lot of kids. They try to place everyone at the school first preference, but there's some oversubscribed schools that don't have enough places. So that's why the lottery is needed. Also in Utrecht, they have a lottery, in Haarlem and Amstelveen and The Hague. But not everywhere. So if you live somewhere else, then ask how that works. In Amsterdam, there used to be priority for Dalton, Montessori, Waldorf, primary school graduates. That is not anymore the case. So everyone has the same chances to enter Montessori secondary school. The outcome of the lottery is the 10th of April at 3:30. So everyone is waiting then, and online you will see the results. So that's very exciting. Every city is a bit different. This is about last year in Amsterdam. I won't go through that now, but you can look at it at home if you are interested. But every year it can be different, also with the popular schools, so don't focus too much on that. Also considering the time, these are some frequently asked questions that some I've already answered. I will briefly go over them. Some of you asked those questions in the form. If you have twins, there's no sibling priority anymore at secondary schools in most cities. In Amsterdam, there's not, but maybe some cities, some schools still have that. So in practice, your twins are just 2 separate children. They both get a lottery number, and it can be they go to different schools. If you want them to go to the same school, it's better to apply for a school that's usually not oversubscribed, so they have enough places to place everyone. There are some specialty schools, for example, art school, for which you have to do an intake. So you have to build a portfolio that you have to present. And only if you pass the intake, you will see the school on your list. So only then you can apply for the specialty schools. But it doesn't mean that your child will get a guaranteed place. So it can still be that they don't end up there. But if you don't do the intake, then you can never enter that school because it's not on the list even. It's also important to know that, so in principle, everyone takes part in the lottery, but for children who have a very specific case, then the parents could apply for the hardship clause, and that has to be done a lot in advance, so before the official application period. So, for example, a friend of my son, he's hard of hearing. He cannot go to school that's too big or with a lot of acoustics. So they found a school where the building works for him. and then they applied for that specific school. You have to build a case. You have to explain why that school and not another school, and then you don't need to take part in a lottery. There's a guaranteed spot. Or, for example, a child who had a serious allergy, and if something went wrong, his mother had to go to school immediately. So it had to be close to home. So those situations you can apply for the hardship clause. Do your homework and build your case. Also ask help from the primary school teacher, because it's only a small percentage of places a school may give through the hardship clause. So you really have to have a strong case. For the people who live in Amsterdam, a lot of things have changed there as well. Previously, you could take part in lottery of both Amsterdam and Amsterdam, but with the central application period, that has changed. So now it's either Amsterdam or Amsterdam when you live in Amsterdam, that is, but not both anymore. So you have to check which schools you prefer and take part in that lottery. A lot of schools, they offer homework support or tutors. Often you have to pay for that extra. It's also common for parents, especially in the first year, to hire a tutor who comes to your house, or there's some homework locations where your child can go to together with other students. So maybe it's not needed, maybe it is, but know that the option is there, but often, yeah, it costs extra money. Also, a question I often get is, can you change schools after the first year? Well, in theory, you can, but in practice, that is pretty difficult. We have experienced that with my older son. There's no lottery anymore, so you have to apply for a lot of different schools, and only at the end of the school year, they know if some students move house or repeat a year. And only then they know if they have a place and how many. And so it can be that, yeah, you cannot change, but it can also be that you get invited at 5 schools at the same time. It's very nerve-wracking. But so yes, you can schools, but it's not always easy to do so. If you need more information, I've listed a lot of articles I've written and videos I have recorded about secondary schools. There's a lot of other sources as well. Begin with the municipality of where you live, and then there's some national websites like School op de Kaart. A lot of information, yeah, to say that, especially if you hear that from international parents or from parents of older children, check if it's still up to date and if they have interpreted in the right way, because a lot of things you hear around are not entirely correct. So be prepared for that too. If you need a private consult, there's the link here, and then we talk about everything related to your situation in your city. I'll go to a lot of open days of the schools as well in Amsterdam. So if you see me, you can always join me and I'll explain you a lot of things. So if you still have time and you still have questions, then you're welcome to ask them. You can always reach me through this email address and phone number. I see a lot of questions came in, so I answer them in order of appearance. When the impact of when a child joins school in group 7, I think the question is about after newcomer class. That really depends on the level of Dutch. So some children, they just develop quickly, they learn the language quickly, and then after group 8, they can go to regular secondary school. Or maybe the advice is to go to brugklas and then go to a higher level secondary school. So stay in close contact with the teacher, especially the group 8 teacher, to see what's the best for your child. It's a warning about brugklas, that it's very stressful, also for parents. Yeah, I think depends on the situation. I also have some clients who sent their child to brugklas and they were very relaxed about it. And so it depends on the child and the teachers and the parents and the situation in the school. And it's not always stressful. And But yeah, if you think it doesn't work, then maybe your child could also go to secondary school to a lower level and then maybe climb up later. That's an option too. The teacher recommends brugklas if needed. As parents, you cannot apply directly, that goes through the school. In my experience, not all the Group 8 teachers know about brugklas, so maybe you want to start talking about it yourself if you think that could be a good option. Oh, that's what Deborah says as well. And it's also common to take an IQ test for brugklas. Depends a bit on the city, what they require. But it's not easy to get in. So they have to be motivated and usually better at math than for Dutch. And a certain IQ to see can they handle the level, because it's very intense. It goes very quick. Yeah, about visiting schools when your child is still in group 7. Yeah, it depends a bit on the school. Some schools, they say only group 8 children are allowed, but they don't really check, in my experience. It is a good idea, especially when you have to select so many schools for your list in group 8, that you already visit some schools in group 7. Your child does not know their level yet, so maybe you want to visit a school that offers multiple levels. Yeah, some children, they don't want to know anything about secondary school yet, and then I would say do not force them. But maybe it's good that they have some idea of what is a secondary school. How does it work with the different teachers and different subjects? How does it feel? What is a canteen? What are lockers? So that they have a bit of an idea of it. And then more concretely, you visit the schools in group 8. Then some schools, they have a trial class for group 7 children specifically. Usually that's at the end of the school year, so after the lottery has taken place. So that could be an option as well, that the group 7 children get some idea of the secondary school in that way. Yeah, the statistics of the schools, the School op de Kaart website and alle cijfers, a few slides back, you can see them. It's the number of graduates, average grades, no. Also, yeah, for the graduation, so the final year, but not for the other years. They're not that specific, a number of bullying incidents per year. That's not registered in that way. But you could ask the school how they deal with bullying, and they all need to have anti-bullying protocol, but some take that a bit more serious than others. So that's a good question to ask. And then the inspection reports, you can also read them. If there's a lot of signs of some issues, then the inspection will pick them up as well. And you can see the inspection rating, that's public. Most important things to learn in group 7 and 6. There's nothing more important than other things. Every year is important. So the transition test is basically Dutch and math. Reading is important, like you said, comprehensive reading, but social development is important as well, and artistic development. And so you shouldn't focus only on the things that are being tested, but the overall development of the child. The lottery for Amsterdam, yeah, there's one lottery for all the children live in Amsterdam, and the municipalities around Amsterdam, they all have the same chances of getting a place. So there's not a separate lottery for outside of Amsterdam. It's an interesting question. The questions that can truly reveal the essence of a school's culture and values when visiting. Well, the open days, they give you a lot of information, but it's also sort of marketing performance. So you have to look a bit outside of the obvious, oh, everything is so nice here. I always find it helpful to talk with the teachers, but also with the students. So it's common that they have some students who are guides and they lead the parents and group 8 children around through the school. You can ask them anything. Just see how they talk about the school, how they experience it. Also talk with a lot of other parents. Maybe they have older children who already go to that school. Especially with my first son, when he was in group 8, I drank so much coffee with other parents and just exchanging information. I knew a lot of things in theory. It was also middle of Corona, so we couldn't physically visit the schools. So I asked a lot of parents, okay, does your child go to that school? How do they like it? What do they do? So exchange a lot of information. What are the most important questions to ask really depends on your priorities and your values. It's not generic, so I cannot give you a specific answer in that. My advice is use my survey when you visit the schools. And after each visit, write down the things you liked and you didn't like right away, because after the 5th school, you can really not distinguish anymore. The best school does not exist, and the best question to ask the schools also does not exist. It's a very personal decision. Still question coming in, when there's no lottery, is it allowed or recommended to register to 2 schools? No, you can only register for 1 school. If there's no lottery, then they say, so that's in the smaller towns usually, you can visit the schools that are available and then you register with the one you like best. If there's no lottery, it usually means they always have a place and then it's not needed to register for more than one. Check with your municipality how it works, because it's really different from town to town. Another question, is it okay just to choose a school close to home? Depends. So in Amsterdam, you have to make a list of 9 schools for HAVO and BWO. They're not all close to your house. You don't get priority for the schools close to your home. And maybe the closer by school is a Montessori school and you don't care for Montessori, then it wouldn't make much sense to choose that school. It is common for children to cycle 15, 20, a bit more minutes one way to school. So distance is one of the variables, but there's many more to consider. Okay, if you have any other questions, then contact me in person. Thank you for attending. Sorry for running a bit out of time, but yeah, it's just a lot of information and I also want to answer your questions thoroughly. Maybe I'll see you in a private call, maybe at the Schola Arena or during the open days. We'll be in touch. Good luck with your decisions. It can be overwhelming, but it will be okay in the end. Have a good night and see you soon. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye. Thank you.